Hello, welcome back to the Lick of the Week videos. This is our third video in the transition lick series. I'm going to continue with the 1 to the 4. I know in the last video I said we were going to move into different territory, going from the 4 chord to the 5 chord, looking at transitions for that. But I had a few email requests asking me to hang with this 1 to 4 a little bit longer and maybe show chords, how you would use chords to do that. So I thought, well, okay, let's do that. So we'll save the 4 to the 5 transition stuff for another time. I'm going to give you a close-up of the fingerboard, and we'll just move right into it. And again, we're moving from the 1 to the 4 chord in the progression, which, since we're playing in the key of G here, we're going to call this from G to C. And again, we're using transitions to kind of give you smooth ways, cool ways to transition from G to C. So we looked at, rolling ideas that had the F note. Here's another approach that involves chords, which is what some of you were asking about. There's some pretty cool transition ideas that will help get you from G to C or 1 to 4 that involve, I will say, some of them being simple ideas, some of them being a little more exotic. So let's start with the simple ideas. Let's say you're vamping, doing simple backup, maybe just rolling over chords, and you want to transition between G and C. And one of the approaches you'll see Strokes players do is to drag the entire F shape up the neck. So they will go from here to here, but you'll often hear players, instead of just making this drastic change from here to here, you'll hear them do what I'll just call bass walk-ups or bass walks. Now, if you're talking about transition licks, remember that whatever the transition lick is, it has to fit within the timing of the measure you're working in. So again, I'll use 9-pound hammer, which is my favorite tune to use for these songs, for examples. I'm going to vamp 9-pound hammer from the 1 to the 4. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Okay, and then the next verse rolls around, it'll be the same chord structure again. So instead of just, jumping from the 1 to the 4 chord, we'll use the bass walk-up idea. But now the classic approach to this may sound like that. And again, I'm just playing the 1st and 4th strings. At first, I'm staggering the notes. I'm playing 1, 4, and then I'm pinching. But you could pinch all the notes. You could pinch 1 and 4, 1 and 4, 1 and 4, and then 1 and 4. Now here's the thing. Just like when you're doing the licks we did in the previous videos where you're rolling over an F note, some of the more exotic ideas had pull-offs. Whatever the time value is of that transition lick you're trying to pull off, you're trying to do inside that measure, the time value of that is going to impact what else is being played in that measure. So in other words, you can't do a transition lick that lasts 4 beats inside a measure that lasts 4 beats, because the transition lick will be so large it will cancel out anything else you try to do. So you have to kind of cut and paste a little bit. So if I'm vamping 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and for that first measure of 9-pound hammer, for instance, then I have to get here for 4 beats. Whatever the transition lick is I'm trying to do, I'll have to deduct that from my vamps, which means I'll have to stop vamping for the same amount of time it would take me to do that. That way they will all fit inside the measure. So let me give you an example. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy. So by the time I get to the word heavy, which is the first word in that C measure, I use the transition lick to pull me to that change, which is what transition licks are for. But you notice I had to stop vamping. How long did the transition lick last? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Here's the transition lick, and 4 and. It lasted a beat and a half the way I'm playing it. So if you want to change the time value of those notes, you can. But that would be an atypical way you'll hear that lick played, the transition lick. So again, as requested, that's a chord approach that if you don't know, you can add to your repertoire of transition ideas. But again, remember that when you do the transition lick, you can't play 4 beats of G and then expect to get to C on time, because if you do, this will happen. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy. I'm already out of time. I've already dropped a beat and a half. I should have been at C a beat and a half sooner than I was, because I tried to play all 4 beats of G and then do the transition lick. You can't put the same notes in the same spaces and expect them to fit. 2 notes can't occupy the same space. It's one or the other. Now, that would be moving from here to here in C. What if you were staying in the lower positions? Because again, in this video, we're talking about chord transitions. Let's say I was playing some rolls in G, playing backup. Make sure I'm in tune here. Some other cool approaches to using chords as transitions don't always involve, taking full shapes and moving them up the neck. Sometimes it could be moving in this direction with chords. So what I'm doing here is I'm making actually a major 6 chord. This is like G6/E minor. What I'm going to do is take my ring finger and put it on the 2nd string at 5, since this is from G to C. That gives me the same notes as E minor, believe it or not, but since my D string is open, I could call this G6. It doesn't really matter what you want to call it, theoretically speaking. The main thing is, can you make the position and can you move it? What I'm going to do again is I'm substituting the time value for the transition lick, which is this. Drag this position half step at a time. You can use different fingers if you want. And what it's doing is leading me to the 4 chord. And then I'm in C, and I can play whatever I want to play over the C measure there. But again, it's pretty stylized. It's something more akin to, say, Sonny Osborne or Don Reno or somebody like that. And the right hand pattern doesn't really matter. I'll let you make up the patterns for yourself. I'm going pinch 1 and 2, and then quickly playing the 3rd, and then pinching all 3. And again, you notice I was playing open rolls. You could have been playing something here, But the main object of this part of the video is, you're using the chord sounds from somewhere in this range, wherever the 1 chord is located, which is the F shape. Yeah, I'm modifying it. I'm making like a major 6 version of it, but it's still a transition idea based on chord shape thinking that gets me from there to there. Another approach would be to actually steal a little bit of the 4 chord. What do I mean by that? Let's say we're moving from G to C, but we want to keep a chord approach going. I can actually steal a little bit of the C chord. There's a bar C at 5, so I'd actually be dipping into that. But again, in my head, this is sounding more like another version of a G6. Yeah, I am occupying the 4th string at 5 and the 2nd string at 5, which again are 2 notes out of that bar C. So you can think of it as dipping prematurely into the C in another location. I eventually want to get to this C, but I'm going to steal 2 of these notes, but I'm associating those notes with this G chord. So before I did this, right, and I can actually get you even closer to the fingerboard, we used this for what we called our G6, and we flatted it, and that got us to C here. Okay, what I could do is, instead of doing this version of a G6, I could pick my pinky up, and I'll put the pinky on the 3rd. I know it's hard to see in the camera shot, but my pinky is now holding the 3rd string at 5. So instead of having the second string added to the chord, I'm going to add that note. Now I'm going to rearrange my fingers so that you can see this a little better. Those are the three notes. And you notice we're pulling them down chromatically, just like we did these three. So I could be rolling around on the banjo, or I could be playing out of this chord shape. And those would be chord approaches to help, drag you around. Another approach would be to take would be not to play three notes, but to play two. And again, I would be dipping into the C chord before I actually got there. But even though I'm not playing all three notes, in this case I'm just playing the fourth string at 5 and the second string at 5. Of course, you can change the right hand patterns, to suit yourself. That would be a slightly thinner sound. But it's still in my head, I'm still thinking G6, but again, I tend to think theoretically a lot. But you can just think, okay, these are just two notes that are out of this bar C. So I'm making a preemptive strike, so to speak. I'm going to the C before the C actually appears. So let me think about 9-pound hammer. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy, a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Now let me use the other version. Well, roll on, buddy, if you load a coal. How can I roll when the wheels won't go? So you can hear how those transition ideas are dragging you to the C. Even though we are dipping into a C chord here partially, I tend to quantify this as I'm still in the G, but I'm playing G6, and then I'm flatting it, G6, G flat 6, all the way down. So you'll eventually wind up in a C. In this case, you'd have E minor or G6, G flat, then that would be D minor. But even if you don't want to think theoretically at all, that's not the main thing, and you should not worry about what I'm telling you as far as theory goes. The main theory you should get is these are transition ideas, and they are pulling you to the 4 chord, and they're based on chord shapes. So for review, we've got the F-shaped transition lick with walk-ups on the bass string that gets you to the 4 chord, and then we have these, which are chords that pull you down to the 4 chord. So that'll wrap up the 1 to the 4 part of the series, and in the next video we will look at getting from the 4 chord to the 5, or from the 4 chord back to the 1 chord. That's another common change that you'll hear in songs. So we'll see you in the next video. Appreciate you watching.